Hello and welcome to Susurros del Alma or Whispers from the Soul, as the channel is called, now in English also. Welcome to this program of Life After Life. And as you know, this program is dedicated to NDEs. And today we have a bit of a star. Well, I wouldn't say a star, I would say a person who's quite important in this circle of spirituality. Because although she has had various NDEs. She's had various spiritual awakenings, spiritual connections. She's very important to this group of people that, as we were talking about before we started recording, are feeling quite isolated in this type of experience, NDE experience. So she's started a group, let's say, an international association, if you want to call it like that, which we're going to talk about later. We'll go into that and we'll talk about it deeply because there's going to be an online event in briefly in the 7th of June. We'll talk about that later on. And she's going to give all the details about all those people who've had these experiences, not just NDEs, but all types of experiences that have had a spiritual awakening and cannot talk about it. Just cannot talk about it to their friends or to their family or whatever. We're going to talk about this later. It's quite interesting. But first of all, let's give a big welcome to our guest today. I've been very excited about this interview because she has a lot of background and she's a doctor, which is very, very interesting too. In this world, I love interviewing doctors who've had NDEs because it like clashes two worlds together, and I love it. So let's give a big welcome to Dr. Yvonne Kason. Hello, Dr. Yvonne. How are you?
I'm just great today, Peter. Thank you.
Great. I'm very happy and very excited to have you on the program. So, without further ado, let's go into a bit of what happened when you were young. You were very young when you had your like first experience. You had not, I'm not talking about ND, but like a spiritual experience, right? A feeling of
Mhm.
connection.
Yes, well, actually, I now realize it was a near-death experience when
Mhm.
I was 5 years old. Yes, I now realize that I've had five near-death experiences over the course of my life. And my first two actually happened when I was a child, but I never, as a child, labeled them as paranormal or unusual because as a child, you don't have a yardstick, like what is considered normal, what is considered paranormal. It was just what was happening to me. So the first one happened actually when I was visiting Europe with my parents when I was 5 years old. It was the summer before kindergarten. And we were traveling in Switzerland. We were traveling by train, and we were at a train station. And I was a very curious youngster, and I saw like a station hand or something jump off the platform, scramble across the tracks, and climb up onto the next platform. And as a little 5 year old, I thought, oh, that looks like fun. And so I immediately leaned forward to jump onto the railway tracks. And what happened then, I now realize, is that I had a near death experience. But as a kid, I didn't know that. What I actually experienced, it was as if my life was a movie and somebody pressed the pause button. It was like all of a sudden time stopped.
Right.
And there I was. I was actually suspended sort of at a 45-degree angle in space, jumping down on the tracks. But my spirit, my point of perception left my body and I was up above and I was looking down and I could see, from 25 or whatever feet it was that I was higher up, I could see ahead. What I had not looked at before I started jumping was that there was a train rapidly pulling into the station, and I was jumping in front of an oncoming train. I was about to be hit by a train. And interestingly enough, although I was only 5 years old, I clearly understood this meant that I was going to die. I'm about to be hit by a train. It was like my thinking kept going, but the movie of my life was on pause. So
Mm.
I'm about to be hit by a train, which I knew meant that I'm about to die. And interestingly enough, I had no fear, no panic. I was just completely sort of in a state of calm, a state of peace, witnessing,
Mm.
oh, I'm about I'm about to die. Then all of a sudden, it was like somebody released the pause button and the movie of my life started moving forward again. And some gentleman on the train platform reached forward and grabbed my little body. I was only 5 years old, right? Pulled me back onto the platform. So the train went in front of me, with a gust of wind, and I was not hit by the train. And, of course, I got a good scolding from my parents. But afterwards, I now realize, as an after effect, I started having lots of out-of-body experiences. And I remember, that I would be flying down the street, flying over the schoolyard, etc. And as a little kindergarten age child, when I started kindergarten, I made some new friends, and I was bragging to one of my little new friends, guess what, I can fly, because that's how I understood it. I didn't realize this was like, there was no boundary between these out-of-body experiences and regular reality. I thought I could fly, that was how I understood what happened that day. I flew, and now I was flying lots of times and flying over the schoolyard, and my friend laughed at me and said, no, there's no way you can fly. And I said, sure, I'll show you. I remember this so clearly. We had a little fence and gate in front of our house, so I climbed up on the fence, I spread out my arms like wings, and I jumped off the fence, thinking I would be able to fly down the street and over the schoolyard, but of course I tumbled to the ground. And my friend laughed and walked off. And I still remember this so clearly as a 5-year-old. My reaction was, I was confused.
Right.
I couldn't figure it out. Like, why do I have such clear memory of flying, but now I can't do it? Anyway, now, many, many years later, and as a doctor, as you mentioned, that I've been researching near-death experiences and other paranormal experiences for over 40 years, that I realized, oh my God, that was a near-death experience when I went out of body and time stood still and I went into that place of calm, and I had the after effect. When you add up the number of criteria for a near-death experience, it's like, oh gosh, it qualifies as a near-death experience.
Ticks the boxes.
Yes, it does. And then I had another one when I was 11 years old. Again, I never realized really till about 5 years ago when I did exactly that. I started clicking the boxes and saying, okay, could this also qualify as a near-death experience? And then I discovered, oh my goodness, it does. And so when I was 11 years old, my family was involved in a very, very serious car accident. And most of us were, my father was driving, and most of the family really was quite badly injured. Anyway, I ended up, I had just turned 11, and it was way before puberty, so I was still a child, really, in all ways. And I ended up with a very serious head injury, and I was in a coma for 3 days as a result of the head injury I had in the car accident. Now, I have always had really clear memory of floating above the accident scene. Okay, and watching what was happening down below. This is while my body was unconscious, and hearing my father. My father was very seriously injured, and he had like blood dripping down his face, and he was going, "My daughter, my daughter," and that was because they hadn't found my body yet. He looked around and he could see they hadn't found my body yet, and I know this is accurate because afterwards I asked my dad, I had this strange thing where I thought I was above you and I could see you with the blood saying, my daughter, my daughter. And he explained to me, yes, that's exactly what happened, because I looked around and I realized they hadn't found you yet. And so anyway, and then my memory moves on, and I remember floating when we were in the emergency department of the closest hospital where the ambulance took us, and it was as if the ceiling of the room had gone transparent, and I was like above the ceiling looking down, and I could see the doctors huddled over my body trying to, and a little kid lying on the table, and I remember clearly seeing from a top-down perspective this big round lamp that was sort of disc-shaped, metallic. And, as an 11-year-old, I had no idea what lamps in emergency rooms and hospitals looked like, those operating room lamps. But later, when I trained as a medical doctor, I remember going, yeah, that's what I saw from a top-down perspective. So and then I have very clear memory of waking up. I talk about all of these for those of you who are interested in my book, Soul Lessons from the Light, where I talk about all 5 of my near-death experiences and some of the other powerful experiences, spiritually transformative experiences I've had, like Kundalini awakening, mystical experiences, etc. But my after effect from this one, I'm just going to mention that, then I'll let you ask me another question, is that for almost a year after this car crash when I was 11, I could see ghosts.
Mm.
And we now know, like many years later, that this is a very common after effect of people who've had near-death experiences, that they develop mediumistic abilities. But
Yeah.
I didn't know this as a kid. I thought my house was haunted. That was how I
That's what
interpreted it.
medium's all about, isn't it? You've been in that realm and you've been in this realm, and a medium really is in between, is someone who can connect those two realms. So if you've been in both, it's quite, I suppose it's easier to connect those two realms.
So yes, that is how my spiritual awakening journey started, when I was a child, and unbeknownst to me, having 2 near-death experiences.
My goodness me. Did you did you feel, or do you remember, I don't know if you remember, when you were in the other realm, because you were very small when you had the train experience, did you feel like a maturity, like an understanding of everything? Or did you still have your child's mind, seeing
I
yourself?
would say when I was 5 years old with the train incident, it was sort of in between.
Mm,
Like I was very clearly still a child,
mm.
but I had very clear understanding that, oh, I'm about to die, which is, pretty mature for a 5-year-old.
Yeah, so it had some sort of maturity to it,
Yes.
like an understanding to it. And in the other one with the 11-year-old, when you were 11?
When I was 11 years old, it really wasn't that I had some profound wisdom during the out-of-body experiences, because they were both out-of-body type of near-death experiences. But I think what was notable about how I felt while I was out of body was there was no fear,
Mm,
there was no alarm.
mm.
There was no sensation of pain, that my physical body might have been experiencing. There was no worry or anxiety. It was just a feeling of safety, yeah, it was a feeling of safety
Mm.
and of observing from a safe place. That's how it felt. Observing from a safe place. Mhm.
Right. And there's another question I had, because I've interviewed quite a few NDEs, and most of them say that at the moment of impact, or in the moment of the death, the actual death, you don't feel anything. And so you just jump out of your body. You see your soul sort of comes straight out of your body. Because there was one lady who I interviewed who had a near-death experience in a car accident also, but she went into a tunnel, and it was a
Yeah.
lorry hit her straight on inside the tunnel. Um, but it was the end of the tunnel of a very long tunnel. But she said that she came out of her body as soon as she went into the tunnel. She doesn't remember the actual impact. She didn't remember anything actually going through the tunnel. So
Well,
her soul left her body before the actual impact. And this is happening.
yeah. I didn't die in either of these experiences,
Yeah,
so they were clearly near-death experiences. Now, in my most recent near-death experience, which was my 5th, that happened in 2003,
right.
I had a slip and fall on black ice, hit my head on rock pavement,
Ouch.
had a severe traumatic brain injury and brain hemorrhage, and died.
Mm.
Now, in that experience, and I can tell you the whole story if you wish, but let me just start with answering your question. I immediately was whisked out of my body on impact.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was immediately whisked out of my body by a force greater than myself. I was like popped out of my body. And I was rushing up through a large, dark expanse of space. Some people might call it a tunnel. For me, it was a large, dark, almost the color behind me, dark bluish, expansive space, until this, like an opening of light. It was like an opening of light. And when I reached the opening of light, since I had in between two other near-death experiences, I knew what this was. This was the light on the other side. And I was, joyously, brought into it. But I was welcomed by two beings of light who are saints from my particular spiritual tradition, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji. And they telepathically communicated with me so that I had the instant understanding that my physical body had died.
Right.
That my work in the incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason was now finished. It was completed. And I entered the realm of light, and it was like a graduation party or a birthday party was being held in my honor. It was like celebratory and joy and unconditional love. Now, I can tell you more about this, and we can maybe come back to it if you wish.
Right.
But what I wanted to go back to your question was, do you feel anything when you die?
The actual impact.
Okay, the actual impact. So that's what I'm going to tell you, is that originally, after I came back, and there's a whole story, we'll get to that later, I did not remember anything about the moment of impact. Right. Originally, I did not. Right. And all I remembered is being popped out of body and, what I've just told you. That's the beginning of that near-death experience. There's more, but that was the beginning.
Right.
But perhaps it was a year or so or two later. I'm really uncertain of how much later it was. Maybe it was a year, maybe it was two, I'm not sure. I went to a Native Indian sacred site in Canada. It's called the Petroglyphs, Peterborough Petroglyphs. And there was, I saw, whether it was there or not, I don't know. I saw an image that was, there was a sign beside it saying soul retrieval. That this is the shaman going off into the ethers, into the netherland, to retrieve soul fragments for their students, so that their students can heal. And I remember sort of talking to God in my head going, gee, I wonder if I have any soul fragments that need to be recovered from the ethers. Anyway, later that day, when I lay down to nap, all of a sudden it was like, wow, a big chunk of memory opened in my consciousness.
Right.
And suddenly I remembered what it felt like when I hit my head. And it felt like it was severe pain. It was severe. It was like an axe had cut into my head. Like there was an instant of absolute severe pain, but it lasted like a millisecond. And then poof, I was popped out of my body and it went into the near-death experience. And when that memory fragment, if I could call it that, got stuck into my memory, it was like a piece had been missing from the jigsaw puzzle. And now that the piece was in, it was like, I somehow felt better, even though it was like a very painful memory. I felt sort of complete. It was like, okay, that was a piece that was missing. Yes, there was a split second, and in the infinite love of the higher power, I was made to forget it. Right. But I guess it was so so that's what my answer would be, right, is that if we're meant to remember it, we will, and if we're not, we won't. And I didn't remember it at first, but then later on I was given it to me, but I was glad to have it because it made me feel more whole. Right. That I had the entire memory. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's like having chunks missing. Mm-hmm. You don't have the whole experience there, do you? Yeah, no. I understand. Yeah. So the third experience, when was that?
So you want me to go to my first adult near-death experience?
The third, okay. Yeah.
Because the one when I died was number 5. That was in 2003. Okay. So my first adult near-death experience, which was, I now know is my third near-death experience, happened to me when I was a young doctor, when I was 26.
Right.
And I was on a I was finishing my residency training. I was already an MD, and I was in a medevac, medical evacuation flight. And at this time, these days, it was done in little twin propeller airplanes. So it's a little twin propeller airplane called the Piper Aztec, and in northern Canada in the middle of winter. And we flew into bad weather. They say they did like an inquest after the crash that probably the air filters on both of the propeller engines froze over because the snow in the like blizzard winter storm. And first one propeller stopped, then the other propeller stopped. So if you're on a twin propeller plane, that means there's no engines left.
That's bad. It's like a bad movie, like an adventure movie.
And so what happened was we were being buffeted by the winds and the snow, and then one engine stopped. And you know, if you've ever flown in a propeller plane, you know that they're very loud. The motors are very loud and noisy. So you notice when one stops, because instead of the big roar, it's sputter, sputter, silence. You go, uh-oh, and then sputter, sputter, silence on the other side. And so, uh-oh, double uh-oh, we have no engines. I look up at the pilot, and he's like pulling this and doing that. You know, he's desperately trying to steer the plane and get it started, whatever. And we're shaking like crazy, the worst air turbulence you can imagine. We're going down towards the ground. And I remember my first reaction, it was intense fear and panic. It was just like, and it literally jumped out of my heart, the thought, not verbally, but out of my heart. It was, oh God, help, I'm gonna die. And I guess that was close enough to a prayer, because that is when my near-death experience started. That what I now realize was while the plane was going down, before it crashed.
So that's where the term comes from, scared to death. Because that's what happened.
Well, what happened right after that thought, God help, I'm gonna die. It was more than a thought, it was like a plea for help. All of a sudden, it was like this force field of peace started descending on me, and it was literally like it was pushing down all the fear. And what was coming upon me, what was descending upon me, was this incredible feeling of peace and this incredible feeling of safety. And then all of a sudden, I heard a clear inner voice. And before this time, I had never heard inner voices before, but this was a very clear inner voice, and it was a masculine inner voice. And it said, "Be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always." And with those words, it was like the vibration that permeated my being was just indescribable.
Wow.
Of the presence, of being safe, that there was nothing to fear. I was still fully alert. The plane had not crashed yet, and I was now in this sort of mystical state. I turned and I started comforting the patient who had now regained consciousness. The pilot very, very heroically managed to steer the free-falling plane. This part of Canada where we were crashing, it's heavily forested, undeveloped in northern Canada, but there are also lots and lots of lakes. So if we had crashed into the trees, that would have been it, done, game over. So he was trying to steer the free-falling plane. He had pulled up the wheels, and he was trying to do a belly landing onto the surface of the light, a guided belly crash landing, I guess you call it, on the surface of a lake. And he did, and we were skidding across the ice unbelievably, and we would have been okay if the ice was thick enough, but it wasn't. And once the plane came to a stop, the ice cracked, broke and the plane very quickly nosedived and sank into very, very deep water. So we had to very quickly get out of the plane as it was sinking. This is the middle of winter, wearing heavy parkas, heavy
Freezing
boots.
water. Mm.
Yeah, and so I tried, and the nurse and we tried to pull the patient's stretcher out of the plane, but it was wedged in. It was impossible to get out in time. And then she went down, unfortunately, when the plane went down. The pilot, he'd radioed out a mayday. And then all of a sudden, plane was gone. We're in the middle of a blizzard in a semi-frozen lake. The wind's all choppy. And the voice says to me, swim to shore. Now, where we were, believe it or not, this is the honest to God truth. It's a place called Devil's Gap. And it's in Lake of the Woods near Kenora. And it's called, I know, it's called Devil's Gap because it has a really, really strong current between where we crashed and the shore. That means there was open water with a really, really strong current. It's treacherous in summer and in winter, and that's how it's got its name, Devil's Gap. And going away towards the open lake, there was ice, but we had no idea to know how thick the ice was. And so the voice said again, swim to shore. And the pilot kept saying, try to get on the ice, try to get on the ice. And I remember, I was inexperienced in higher guidance at that point in my life. Hopefully at this point in my life, I would have learned the lesson, listen to the inner voice.
That's right.
But at that age, this was new for me, and I started arguing with the inner voice. No, I'm not going to swim to shore. I took lifeguarding when I was younger. You drown if you try to, they say if you have a boating accident, stay in the spot, right? And so I instead of swimming to shore, I turned towards the ice and tried to get on. But sure enough, the ice was too thin, and I was just getting more tired and more frozen and more tired every time I tried to get on the ice, which would break off. And the voice repeats, swim to shore. So finally, I turned and I started swimming to shore. And it was a very long and a very difficult swim. And several people have said they think it's virtually a physical impossibility that I made it that distance to shore in middle of winter, heavy clothes, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, part way to swimming to shore is when what I now know was my near-death experience deepened. And see, I'm still conscious. I'm not dead. Okay. I'm swimming to shore. All of a sudden I hear like this rushing noise, like the roar of a waterfall. And I feel my consciousness lift up above my body. But it's more complicated than that, because it's actually like my consciousness is two places at the same time. And I compare it to, when you have a split screen TV with a little picture and a big picture. Most of my consciousness, the big picture, was up above my body now. But there was still at the same time a little bit of my consciousness that was down in my physical body, that was stroke by stroke, desperately trying to get to shore. So the bulk of my consciousness now rises even higher, and I go into this realm, place, state. It's impossible to find the words to describe it, but I went into, let's call it a place or state that was absolutely filled with light. So it's dark and stormy where my physical body was. So suddenly where most of my spirit was, it was just this beautiful white light. And how I describe it to people is when you fly in an airplane, when you're ascending and you're just at the top of the clouds before you break into the sunlight, and it's all sparkly, diffuse white light around you. That's what it was like for me in the white light realm. It was not blinding. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was filled with light. It was luminous. For a second, I saw a luminous face of light that then disappeared into sort of like the cloud-like periphery. And I felt this incredible, powerful love. For me, that was the most profound aspect of what I experienced on the white light, on the other side, in the white light realm, was this incredible, unconditional love. So powerful, beyond the ability to describe in words. And it was, I guess, my soul recognized, like, it's not that somebody explained to me what this is. It's like my soul instantly recognized what I was experiencing. And my soul just knew that what I was experiencing was the love of the higher power, what I had been raised to call God. And the way I was actually experiencing God or the higher power was not anything like what I had been taught in my church of childhood. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me if I'd been good or bad. That was not at all what I was experiencing the higher power to be. What I was actually experiencing was that the higher power, what I call God, people can call it by whatever name they want.
Yeah.
God gets it. Was like an infinite, universal force field of love, of infinite intelligence that is underlying all of creation and non-creation, past, present, and future. That it's the substance underlying, protecting, enveloping, permeating, all at the same time, all of creation. And I also somehow knew, without it being said to me, it's just my soul knew, that what I think of as me would live on, whether or not my physical body that's still, swimming, struggling, went under a few times, almost drowned, that I would live on, whether or not my physical body down there would live on. And I really was not concerned. I was detached from what the outcome was going to be because I was home. I was home. Well, my physical body, I could go on, but I'll give you the key points. My physical body did manage to swim to shore quite miraculously through the grace of God. And again, through a series of coincidences, if you believe in coincidences, the only vehicle that could possibly have rescued me from where I swam to, which was an island in the middle of winter, would have been a helicopter. And normally there's no helicopter in this part of the world. And there just happened to be a helicopter like 5 kilometers away because it set down because of the same storm. And it just so happens that an airplane that right above a big Air Canada plane, miles above, 30,000 feet or something, it had picked up the distress message when we crashed, so it was able to relay it down to the ground, and somebody relayed it to the helicopter. All these things, so that the 2 guys who'd never met before, just when they got the message, they got in the helicopter, even though they didn't know each other. They went out to look for us. They knew where to look, and they found us and managed to bring the 3 of us that survived, myself, the pilot, and the nurse, to the closest hospital. I remember watching from above as the helicopter landed on the driveway, and they rolled out the gurneys and put me on a gurney and wheeled me in. And they finally, they couldn't take my temperature because my temperature was below the bottom reading on their mercury thermometer. So then finally, they brought us to the physiotherapy department, and they put my body in the hot whirlpool bath to reheat my body. And it was there in the hot whirlpool bath, as my body was being reheated, that I felt my consciousness re-enter my body. And what that felt like was whoosh, like how they depict a genie being sucked into a bottle. I had been in this big, expansive space up above, and it felt like through the top of my head, through the small, narrow opening at the top of my head, I was sucked back into my body. And then suddenly I'm back. And I remember I was sitting in the whirlpool bath, and I'm rubbing with my totally frostbitten, frozen fingers, rubbing my legs in the water. And I kept saying over and over again, I'm back, I'm back, I'm going to live, I'm going to
live. So there, first of all, synchronicities. Those are all synchronicities, as Carl Jung put it. Things that flow with it are things that happen, things that should happen. So you were having this out of body experience a long time, because how long was it from where they picked you up to where they took you? It's a long time, on Earth time, because where you were, there was no time.
Yeah, I would say you're asking from the moment I went out of body?
Yeah, until you came back in the whirlpool.
Yeah, that was probably a good half hour to
Mm.
45 minutes, or maybe even an hour. I really don't know from Earth time because I was not existing in Earth time at that time. My consciousness
Of
was not.
course, yeah, of
So,
course.
yeah, but it would have to have been at least 45 minutes to an hour. Yeah.
That's amazing. That is an amazing experience. And apart from the synchronicities that happened, also that made that possible. And I'm glad the three of you made it as well. I'm sorry
Thank
about the
you.
one who didn't. I'm glad the three
Yes.
of you made it.
Hmm.
So they'd have to go back and take out the plane to take the other passenger out of the plane.
Yes, they did, and I've actually, as fate would have it, I've kept in touch with the pilot and the pilots of the helicopter, and we actually had a plane crash reunion, if you can think of
You're
that.
joking.
During COVID, no, we didn't. Everyone's locked in and at home, and so one of us had the idea, let's have a plane crash reunion. So we tried to get everyone together. And one of the fellows says, I met one of I know who one of the divers is who went down and pulled out the plane. You want to come bring him to the reunion? And I said, well, of course, you know. So, we all got to share from our own perspectives,
That's great.
the events that happened. I was the only one of us that had a near-death experience. The nurse, she passed away before our reunion, so I'm not certain if she had a near-death experience or not. The pilot who was flying my plane as it trying to avoid the hit the trees, he said he was so focused on trying not to crash into the trees, he didn't have time to have a near-death experience. That's his views. And the helicopter pilots who rescued us, they were so nonchalant. It was almost as if they felt they had no other choice. It was like this was a no-brainer. Of course they were going to come out and look for us and try and rescue us. Like, yes, they were risking their lives. Yes, their helicopter it's like an unawareness came upon
Yeah.
them that the only awareness they had was to try and rescue us. And I thanked them multiple times for having, with deep sincerity, I'm going to cry,
Yeah.
for
No,
having saved
listen,
my life. But then I want to mention the diver who went down, and they said that of course they had to retrieve the body of the patient who unfortunately went down with the plane. And I always felt, if only I'd tried a little bit harder, could I have gotten her out of that plane in time? And this diver said, oh no. It was even very difficult. They had to bring in like special saws and equipment because the stretcher had been so strapped in and secured in the plane that even they had great difficulty finally removing her body from the plane. And so I was glad to know that, because that was always a little bit, couldn't I have
yeah,
tried
of
a
course.
little bit harder and saved her
No.
life? But he said, no, Yvonne, you did all that you could do.
And yeah, you were lucky to get out of it yourself. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, swimming in freezing cold water to get to the shore, and then,
And the long distance, people say it was about 200 yards, with a heavy winter
long
coat
current.
and boots on, in a strong current in winter. Fortunately, how God and synchronicity, as you said it, I was very athletic at that age, very fit and very athletic. And what was my favorite activity?
Swimming.
Swimming.
I can imagine.
Swimming laps at the pool. I was an extremely strong swimmer. So in retrospect, it was like God prepared me,
Yeah,
that I was going to have a very difficult swim. My life would depend on it.
yeah, yeah. All these things we make a contract before we come, and we know what's coming. So we've
Maybe at some level, I sure didn't consciously know.
no, 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 no. I mean, before we come, we never remember what we come here for, and why or who we are, and we don't remember anything when we come here.
Yeah.
But
But, interesting. I want to talk a bit about the after effects, if I may,
of course,
because um, this my first adult near-death experience created a really big spiritual awakening in me. Like,
turning point.
yeah, unlike the two childhood experiences, which, as a kid, it's just like, yeah, one of those things I experienced.
Yeah, that's right.
Just part of my life. Whereas this changed my life. This, my first adult near-death experience, completely changed my life.
Mm.
I mean, first off, I absolutely lost my fear of death. And I absolutely knew that all of us, not just me, all of
Yeah.
us, our souls will live on after our physical bodies die. And I absolutely knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the higher power is real. What name you call it, how you understand it, the intellect can argue with that if they want to. I don't bother, but but it's real. It's real, and it's loving in nature, and it loves every single one of us. And with all of my many near-death experiences, I know that there's a happy ending for everybody eventually. Oh, maybe
Right.
many, many, many lifetimes till we get there.
Yeah.
But that's the divine plan, that there's going to be a happy ending for everybody eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I always say, I've said it many times on the program, that I envy the people who have had NDEs because of that. Not because they've died or because they've had an out of body experience, but because of what they feel, assurance, the assurance that it goes on, consciousness goes on.
It's more than an assurance, it's a knowing. It's a different,
That's what I
it's a
mean.
knowing.
It's not like a belief anymore. It's a
No,
knowing.
it's a knowing,
There's a
because
big
man,
difference.
then it's like if you've ever been to the ocean, it's salty. And someone can say, no, it's not. And it's like,
Yeah.
I know that it
Yeah.
is because
Yeah.
I've had the experience. And,
That's right.
bless you, you've not had the experience. You want to argue that it's sweet. Well, you can think that, but I know it's salty.
Yeah. That's been the argument since the beginning of humanity. They say we don't know if there's life after death because no one's ever been there and come back. You say, well, they have.
Yes, they have.
They
You
have.
just don't want to believe them.
That's right.
The other thing is, I had very powerful spiritual and psychic after effects after this near death experience when I was 26. Is that a few years, 3 years before this, I had had another spiritual experience, a different type of one. What I now know was a Kundalini awakening that happened when I was meditating. And again, I didn't know what that was. I just put it out of my mind. I was in medical school. I was studying. It's like, what are these weird things happening to me? We'll put that over there in a compartment and think about it later. I had to focus on my studies and my exams, right? So, but after my near-death experience in the plane crash, my Kundalini symptoms increased dramatically. And I know with my research, can happen to people after a near-death experience, that it can initiate a Kundalini awakening or it can speed up their Kundalini awakening if they've already had one. And that's what it did to me. And then in addition, it was my consciousness was now opening to having more and more different types of spiritually transformative experiences. I think the first one that opened up for me was clairsentience, where I could feel within my own body and consciousness the feelings of others. If someone was lying, I knew it immediately. My whole body would I could feel it. If someone was angry, I would feel it. If someone was sad, I felt it as physical sensations. I became an empath. I became incredibly clairsentient. Then I started having clairvoyant experiences. A few weeks after the plane crash, I was driving to visit a friend, and I was stopped at an intersection in my car. And all of a sudden I got this clear mental image, a visual image. And before that, I'd never had clairvoyant images, a clear visual image of my friend's brain covered in pus. And to me, as a medical doctor, it was clearly a symbol for meningitis.
Right.
And like, what is this? When I arrived at my friend's house, how are you today? Oh, she said she was feeling really sick. She had this really bad headache. Da, 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 da. And so I told her, listen, I just had this vision. I don't know if it's nonsense or if it's true, but if it gets worse, please go to the hospital and tell them a doctor friend said to check for meningitis. And anyway, turned out later that day, she did go to the emergency. She was diagnosed with meningitis. Fortunately, she got effective treatment and made a full recovery. But that was my first beginning of having many clairvoyant experiences, and then clairaudience, like the hearing the inner voice,
Yeah.
the inner guidance, that's now like a regular part of my life. So they call it the clairs, which you probably know about. So all of the clairs open up in me, and here I am, this young medical doctor, and I'm having this profound spiritual awakening. And then a few years later, the next thing that started happening is I started getting past life recall.
Yeah.
That, I would meet somebody, and all of a sudden, boop,
yeah,
in my consciousness, I would start getting memories of past lives with that person. And I would see how maybe challenges or difficulties, or sometimes the positive points, that in this in relationship with this person in this incarnation parallels. It's like we were continuing on from a previous incarnation with both the good and with the baggage from the past.
That happens a lot. There's a group of souls that usually stay together in each incarnation. So maybe the last time it was your brother, maybe the next time is your boss, maybe the following time is your cousin or your son.
Exactly.
It's usually the same souls that come together. And some of them they're your best friends, and others they're your worst enemies.
Others are not. And sometimes a bit of both.
That's right. But it's there. The understanding of this, to me, as a channeler and as a person who understands this sort of thing, because I've done regressions before, it is they're part of your experience. That's it. They're not good, bad, or ugly. They're just their parts of your experience. Before you come, you've impacted what you want to live, what you want to experience in this life, and you have different ways of experiencing it. And it's free will. You have your free will. You choose which road you want to go down, and which way you want to experience what you've come here to experience. And so,
sorry.
Those people are there not to do you harm or not to do you good. They're just to give you the experience. That's it.
And how I've come to understand it, just to add I agree with you, but I just want to add another level to it. Sometimes people, I'm just going to say one person in my life. I don't want to identify who this person was, a person that I cared about very, very deeply. A former partner, we'll say that, former partner. And I was really, really heartbroken when the relationship ended. Really, really heartbroken. And when I was shown, when Spirit showed me the past lives, several of the past lives I'd had with this person, it was very interesting because there were many levels to it. It was like we'd loved each other in many lifetimes. And like you said, different roles. Sometimes I was the man, he was the woman. Sometimes I was the woman, he was the man, but always something messed up, something screwed up. And it just, I realized, I prayed a lot about, okay, Spirit, you showed me all this, but what is my lesson in this? I don't want to be stuck in being the victim. I'm the victim here, I'm hurt, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe in being in the victim position. And so I move out of the victim position. I try to move into a higher spiritual position. I say, okay, Lord, please teach me what my lesson is here. And my lesson was a little bit similar to what you were saying is, sometimes we've been the so-called good guy. Sometimes I've been the so-called bad guy. It all depends on your point of view. But spiritually, I have to sort of acknowledge both. I need to heal the wounded parts of me that I'm still dragging along. So they need to be acknowledged and healed and loved, those wounded parts of me. And then once these wounded parts of me are feeling like, okay, we're ready to let go of this now, then the next step is to forgive. That if the other person did something to her, like, oh my God, do I want to carry this resentment around with me for another 20 incarnations? No, thank you.
No.
So I choose to let go. I choose to forgive, and then consciously sending vibrations of love and peace and harmony to the other person. And I had to also include me, love and peace and harmony to the wounded parts of me, as well as love and goodwill to that person, and then I think we can finally move on. And for me, that became the point of all of these past lives, was not to go, oh yeah, that's why, I'm the victim. No, it's like, okay, maybe I was, but even if I was, I'm on a path of spiritual growth.
Right.
And I don't want to stay in the victim position.
Mm.
And I choose to heal,
That's
and
right.
then to move on, move into a place of loving forgiveness.
That's right. And that is what most people don't understand is karma. Karma is not payback. Karma is bringing it something to an end. That's a cycle that you're going through all the time, life after life after life. Recognizing that cycle and saying, right, I've understood the experience. I don't need to go through this again. This belongs to the experience in the life before. I've been through this before. I don't need it. Thank you. And that's it. It's finished. It's finished. You don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to cry. You don't have to do anything like that. You just say, okay, I've understood the experience. That's it. It finishes here. And that's it. You let it go, like you said. And then from now on, that cycle should be broken. But
Yeah.
many people have a wrong understanding of karma, of what karma means.
Hmm.
And karma
Hmm.
means that. Karma means bringing a cycle to an end. Say,
Yeah.
okay, I've done that. That's it. I've understood this. I've had the experience. Finished. And accepting it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, because, not only have I been going through my own spiritual awakening process for 40 years now, but also I've been counseling experiencers going through spiritual awakening and dealing with this sort of thing. That was my medical specialty. Is that sometimes people, or I would say many times, people have difficulty letting go, particularly if they've been very, very traumatized, very, very wounded, or if they've gone to some very, very dark places within themselves, like addiction or suicide attempts or things like that, or even violence, And then I think it really becomes important that they ask the higher power for help.
Mm.
And you don't have to be an addict to be asking the higher power for help. I mean, there were times where I just, was so ruffled by
Yeah.
certain life experiences that I experienced as very traumatic.
Mm.
But I didn't want to carry that baggage. I didn't want to be in that ruffled place. And so I know now in my tool bag, ask the higher power to help. So I would ask that, please help me. Please help me to get to a place of forgiveness. Please help me to get to a place where I can let go. And so I just wanted to add that to what you were saying, because I think it's so true. But
Mm.
sometimes when we're just stuck,
Yeah. Ask for help.
ask the higher power for help.
You will ask and it will be given. It will, and if it might not be given to you on a plate, but you will be given guidance of where you can heal, and you can change your perspective on what you've just seen. And this is really important in what we're talking about now, because lots of people, I've helped lots of people too on guidance more than anything, because we can't help anyone. What we can do, you, me, and people who are in holistic healing, we don't help anyone. We guide people to healing themselves. The only person who can heal you is you. Nobody else. I can show you the ropes. I can show you how to do it. I can show you what you have to do. But the work you have to do yourself. Nobody else can do it for you. Nobody. And that's important. And to understand that it's just experience. It's just experience. Like you said, don't be a victim. Don't be a victim. And
And that is a conscious choice.
there you go.
That is something that people are in control of.
That's
That
right.
I refuse. Like when I had my head injury, after the head injury that I told you the first bit about it, where
Yeah.
I died and went into the light, and I was clinically dead for a period of time. That after I came back to my body, I was given the choice whether or not to come back, and I asked to be clearly guided what was the higher choice. And I was very clearly told it will be more difficult, but to go back to the maimed body. And instantly my soul accepted, because I was in such a place of divine presence and trusting the wisdom of the divine plan, that Boom, and I woke up in my previously dead body with a severe traumatic brain injury. Okay, which disabled me completely. I was completely disabled for 12 years after that traumatic brain injury. And I remember we were talking about not being in the victim. After it took a while until I was correctly diagnosed. Now, my doctor friends got me into all the specialists and blah, blah, blah. But once I was correctly diagnosed at that traumatic brain injury, and I was told that, I would be disabled for maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years, or maybe permanently. Now, here I was, doing work that I loved, pioneering, counseling patients with spiritually transformative experiences. I mean, we can get a whole thing of how my life was. I just felt I was doing God's will in my life and pioneering this field of spiritual experiences are not mental illness.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was a pioneer in that field, as you mentioned.
We're just coming out of that now.
Well, still working on it. But I remember reading some articles about prognosis, which is the outcome. What is the prognosis for somebody like me with my type of traumatic brain injury? So I'd just been diagnosed maybe 3 months ago.
Right.
By this point, it took that long to get properly diagnosed. And I'm reading online, and they said, these are the signs of people who have the worst prognosis, highest rate of depression and suicide, 90% suicide rate. Okay. Highly intelligent person. Previous professional occupation. Successful in their previous occupation. And it was like,
ticking all the boxes.
And so I read that, and I'm to be honest with you, Peter, I made a conscious decision. I said, I am not going to be one of those statistics. I refuse to let myself get depressed. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't go through my emotional reactions and, ups, down, and everything in between over the years.
Oh, it's difficult.
But it was like I made a conscious decision. No, I'm not going to be one of those statistics. And, sometimes when you can't control many things, like I couldn't control what was happening with my brain injury and healing, I could choose to not go down the dark path. So I did.
That's great. That's a word of hope to many people who are in that situation now. To many people going down that for illness or for injury or for whatever, who are going through that at the moment. I hope they see this and they can understand that they have to make a choice. They have to make a choice.
You do. And I also got lots and lots and lots of support. Lots of support. And I encourage people, if they're going through some difficult challenges, get the support. Don't be shy to ask for support. I mean, I had tons of specialists, and I had a psychologist, and I had a social worker, and I had a spiritual counselor, and I had a psychiatrist, and I had, my brain therapist, and my, then we went into all sorts of stuff, my chronic fatigue specialist, my food allergy specialist. Then I went to my holistic practitioners, and I did, took out all my mercury fillings. I detoxed for everything you could imagine under the planet. I changed my whole diet. I went organic. I did all that stuff. Like, I also actively worked on my healing, and I anchored myself in my spiritual practice. But, I had to reach a point where it became clear after about 6 years that for whatever reason in the divine plan that I was not going to be healed. That I was now going to be a disabled person on the planet. And then, of course, I started getting into, focus on the ability, not the disability, focus on the cup half full, not the cup half empty. So yes, I'm no longer able to work, but you can also word that as I no longer have to work. Yes, I was only getting a disability pension, but it paid the bills. I wasn't rich, but
There you
it paid
go.
the bills. And so, I always tried to sort of flip things on the positive, and I focused very much on trusting in God's plan. And even though, I lost my ability to meditate, it took me years to get my ability to meditate back. I anchored that I knew God loved me. I knew God loved everybody, but I knew God loved me, for my situation. And even if, people around me, oh, they're crying about what happened to me, I knew, again, this was like a soul knowing. I knew there was some higher purpose that was good. And I didn't have a need to know. I didn't need to know what the higher purpose was. I had so much trust that there was some higher purpose that was good. And, sometimes you open up a book and there's the answer for you in the book. So several times I'd open up a book and there was the answer about burning off karma really, really rapidly through your physical body. And so I thought, okay, if this is the divine plan of how I'm going to burn off several lifetimes of karma in one lifetime, I accept. Okay, I accept. And then another time I'd open up and it said how you can also help burn off other people's karma through your physical body, people that you're praying for. And of course, I'm always praying for the planet and praying for others, etc. And so I went, okay, God, if I'm also burning off karma for people I'm praying for, I'm good with it, And so for me, there was a higher purpose that I accepted. It was like, okay, maybe nobody else gets it, but I think spiritually there's something good, and Spirit's saying it's about burning off my karma and other people's karma, so I accept. And so, but there's this saying, when you make your plans, when people make plans, God laughs. I think that's the saying I'm looking for. When people make plans, God laughs.
That's right.
So I thought, okay, this is what the rest of my life was going to be like, that my out in the world life was completely, it had been wonderful. It had been rewarding. I'd already written 4 books by that time, and I'd come out with spiritually transformative experiences. I'd written about my plane crash near-death experience, all that Kundalini, all that stuff. And I thought, okay, that for the rest of my life, I was going to be like a spiritual hermit. And because I had to, and so what I would do is I would, in my own little private life, I would pray for others and meditate for others. And that would be how I would serve from this point forward. But you wonder, you're here today, aren't you? Yes.
Oh.
Because a miracle happened in 2016, February 24th, 2016, when I was deep in meditation. I've been disabled for over 12 years now from my traumatic brain injury. And according to medical science, you don't heal anymore after 12 years. If you're not healing within 2 to 3 years, they consider it permanent.
Before you go on, what was your disability?
What were the disabilities? Plural? Plural?
Disabilities you had.
Plural? Okay, well, with a severe traumatic brain injury like that, there was, I was experiencing severe problems with short-term memory.
Right.
Severe problems with attention and concentration, like developing severe ADD. Right. I also developed very severe chronic fatigue syndrome, very low stamina. I could only function for a couple hours and my brain would crash. Yeah. I would get overloaded by multiple stimuli. I'd lost the filtering ability. I couldn't use my computer because there would be too much stimuli on the brain. I had difficulty grocery shopping. I had difficulty having a shower because I'd forget if I'd washed my hair or not. I mean, there were very fundamental tasks that were challenging, let alone practicing medicine and being a psychotherapist were like totally out of the question, or writing more books. I mean, if I couldn't use the computer, I couldn't use the computer. Anyway, so what happened on February 24th, 2016, yeah, that is correct. We're almost 9 years now. We are 9 years now, is I was meditating, deep in meditation. As I told you, I focused very much on my meditation because I was disabled. I'd go on long meditation retreats. And I was on a meditation retreat in Encinitas, California, in a spot where Paramahansa Yogananda used to meditate and go into communion with God. So a power spot. I'm very sensitive to power spots. I'm very clairsentient. And I was meditating there on purpose. And all of a sudden, I had this incredibly powerful experience. Inwardly, I perceived like a volcano of light, an eruption of liquid light in the center of my brain. I could see it inwardly, this eruption of light. And as my brain was being illuminated with this liquid light, I had this inner experience of waking up.
Right.
It was like the parts of my brain that had been asleep for 12 years woke up.
Right.
And suddenly my brain was healed.
That
and I was given
that in itself is a book. that what you did there is a book in itself.
Well, I write it in this one, Soul Lessons from the Light.
Soul Lessons, okay.
Yeah, is where I write that. And for me, I wanted to make sure I shared that story in our interview today, because I think it's important for people who are suffering from all sorts of challenges, whatever they might be, physical challenges, whatever challenges they might be facing. There is always hope for healing.
There is.
With God, there is always hope.
Yep.
And I mean, that is supposedly a medical impossibility, but clearly it was meant in the divine plan that I was to heal. I was given the very clear message: pass on what you have learned. And I immediately started writing. I mean, I hadn't done any writing for 12 years. All of a sudden, it was like, not only had my brain awakened, but it was rejuvenated. It was actually, I think, in some ways sharper, and my intuition was enhanced. I mean, my intuition got really enhanced when I couldn't use my logical brain. I was using my intuition a lot more. And so it got developed. And so immediately, I very quickly wrote the first draft of 2 new books. So the first one that came out was this one, Touched by the Light,
right?
Exploring spiritually transformative experiences. And I have about 100 case stories in there of people having different types of spiritual awakenings, because I'm trying to focus that spiritual awakenings happen in a lot of different ways, and they are not mental illness. And then after that, I wrote this book, which is my most recent book, Soul Lessons from the Light, which is actually my personal story, my personal spiritual awakening story, with my Kundalini awakening, my 5 near-death experiences, my mystical experiences in Israel, and the miraculous healing experience that I had in 2016. And so after I wrote those books, Spirit made it clear that I had to start coming out and speaking. So I started speaking at conferences. I got elected onto the board of Iands. I got elected president of Iands, and then Spirit gave me my next assignment. Gave me a download. Now we would like you to found a new organization. And I was given this information as a download in 2019, summer of 2019. And the name of this organization will be Spiritual Awakenings International. And you're going to focus on the whole range of spiritual awakenings that people are having, all sorts of different types, including the near-death experience, but that's only one of the types.
Oh yeah.
And that it was going to be by experiencers for experiencers, a safe place for experiencers to network with others, to learn from others, and to network people around the world like you, who are also trying to raise awareness and support people who are having spiritual awakenings. So we launched in 2020.
That's brilliant. That's really, really good, because I'm doing, as you said, I'm doing that myself. I've been doing that for the last 2 years. And all the holistic therapists that I interview, not just NDEs, but holistic therapists, have all had an awakening. All of them. Every single one of them. And none of them have had NDEs.
That's right. Other types of awakenings. Yeah.
And
Because mine actually started with Kundalini when I was 23. Yeah.
there we go. No, no, yeah. There's all of them because I asked them when in the interview we have a sort of a thing we do where I talk about say what before you started doing this, what were you? I said, oh, I was a lawyer in this big company. Like normal, in the cycle of life that we get pulled into, and then they have a spiritual awakening, and they leave all that, and they start doing holistic therapy, and they start helping, guiding more than help. I don't like using the word helping. I like using the word guiding people to their awakening, to
Mhm.
to find their way, to find what their soul purpose, why they're here, who they are, and all into that. So yes, I totally agree with you. Totally agree.
So let me tell your listeners a little bit about Spiritual Awakenings
Of course.
International, if I may. We are absolutely delighted at how Spiritual Awakenings International has grown in the last 5 years. I founded it together with Dr. Robert Baer, so there's two of us. He actually is a retired police officer.
There you go. Protection. You've got
and
protection.
but now a business consultant, and so he did the business end of it and I did the spiritual visioning end of it. But
Right.
he's also a multiple NDE experience, or multiple near-death experiences. And like most people who've had near-death experiences find themselves opening to other types of spiritually transformative experiences, whether it be mediumistic or afterlife communication or channeling or whatever. And so Spiritual Awakenings International, we're looking at um, showcasing and raising awareness about all types of spiritually transformative experiences, all types. And so we have, monthly speaker events where we have speakers from around the world online. We have monthly experiencers sharing circles online. Again, it's a confidential place where you can come and share about your awakening experiences. And we have people from all over the world showing up at these experiences, sharing circles, because it's unfortunately the same all over the world. There's very few places where people feel safe to talk about their own very real experiences.
Yeah,
And
that's
and then the
true.
other Yeah, and then the other thing we do is once a year, we're hosting an online conference, and we have one coming up. It's
Yay.
going to be Saturday and Sunday, June 7th and 8th online. And our Spiritual Awakenings International Conference is free. We offer it on a donate. Everything we do, we offer on a donation basis because we don't ever want money to be the reason that somebody who wants to attend is not attending.
Of
So
course.
everything is offered for free, and any donations to help us cover our operating costs are appreciated.
Just so everyone knows, the link to this event is in the description of the video. I'll put it in the description of the video so they can go straight there and and put the names down for the event if they want to go to it. So
Awesome.
it's all at hand.
Excellent. Yeah. So the URL, there's a shortcut URL called spiritualconference.org, spiritualconference.org. So if you type that in, you can get to our website and register. And we're delighted to have 40 outstanding speakers from 12 countries from around the world presenting. And we're also having 4 speakers in Spanish.
Brilliant.
We have a regular Spanish program, Eventos en Español. So you can also, at the same link, register for the Spanish panels and get to meet some of our Spanish people going through spiritual awakenings.
I know a lot of them because, as I said, I've been interviewing them for the last 2 years, so I know quite a few from all over the world too, not just in
Mm-hmm.
Spain, because I've been
Mm-hmm.
interviewing people from Chile, from Colombia, from all different types of places, Uruguay, Paraguay, all different places. So they're all over the world too. So they'll be
Yeah,
grateful for this.
exactly. Exactly. And my big takeaway, both from my own personal experiences, which we've touched on a few of them today, but from all the many people that I'm meeting through Spiritual Awakenings International, people like you, that people all over the world all over the world are having spiritual awakening experiences. And I truly believe, and I presented on this at the conference last year, you can watch my video on YouTube if you want, but I really believe that this is the time of the Great Awakening, that, that according to yoga, we're in early Dwapara Yuga, and this is the time of spiritual awakening, that this is the time that more and more people are having spiritual awakenings in their consciousness. And it's not that we're the abnormal ones. We're the front runners.
Yes,
we're the front runners.
No, that's it.
Yeah, that more and more of humanity will be having spiritual awakenings. And sometimes, those of us who are many years into awakening look at what's happening in the world and we go, oh my goodness. I feel like I'm on a completely different level. And in a way we are. But somebody has to be the crest of the wave. So, join us in the Great Awakening. And I encourage everyone to shine their light wherever they are on the planet. And the more little lights on the planet, just like all the lights in the sky behind me, the more lights they are, the more the planet will be illuminated.
That's right. There's becoming more and more of us now, but the ones we've been working on ourselves for a while now, for a few years, we do feel like, what's the world coming to? What's happening in the world? But it's always been like that. But it's just that we've changed, not the world. We've become more conscious, we have more conscious awareness, and the gap has got bigger. So, but we want more people to join us and to come in this community and to understand what's going on, really, what is really.
And I have come to, from my own experiences, like, let me just, if we have time, I'd like to just share at the end of my most recent near-death experience.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
We have time for that. This was in 2003 when I died from the head injury, and I was welcomed into the light by the two saints, and I felt, the joy and the celebration. There's much, much, much I could say. Okay, I'm going to say 2 points. So one is that when I first entered the light, there was like this little piece of my ego was with me, and he was like the little devil voice on your shoulder. You know how they have the picture with a little devil on your shoulder talking to you? So there was a little piece of my ego was like the devil on my shoulder. And I remember I had this thought, little voice, the devil, uh-oh, here comes my life review. Because by this point, I knew from many NDEs that when you actually die completely, most people get a life review. And, I've tried to live a good life, but I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I've made some mistakes in my life. And so there was this part of me, that this voice, this ego voice, the devil on my shoulder, that was, uh-oh, here comes the life review. And what happened then was so beautiful. And that's why I wanted to share it. Because the two saints that were in their light bodies beside me, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, they could read my mind. They knew my thoughts. They knew this thought. And so one of them just glanced over at me, and with this glance was this transmission. And the transmission just blew that little devil away. And with the transmission came this really beautiful and deep understanding that the higher power, Mother, Father, God, however we understand the higher power, is so loving and so understanding. I'm going to use the metaphor of the Divine Mother. So the Divine Mother gets it, that when kids are learning, like imagine your child is learning how to walk, it's going to stumble, it's going to fall, it's going to skin its knees, maybe it's going to break something, whatever, inadvertently harm somebody, or advertently. But the Divine Mother, Father God, in its infinite love, gets it, understands it, that we're all going to make mistakes, that these are all learning experiences. And it's like, whoosh, it was just blown away. Like all that guilt, baggage, it was all gone. It's unconditional love, just as we are with all our boo-boos and goo-goos. We are loved just the way we are.
Which means unjudgmental, no judgment whatsoever.
Yeah, it was just complete love. Like just beyond the ability to express in human words. And then my consciousness then sort of shifted or moved. It's hard to have words to describe the experience on the other side, because it's like timeless time. I was very aware that time was experienced differently on the other side. It was like on the other side, there is no time, but at the same time, I had the awareness that when incarnated in a physical body, we experience time as linear.
That's right.
Okay, so I had an understanding of both at the same time, and suddenly it was like I entered this expansive state of consciousness. It was as if my brain was a computer that had been upgraded from a Pentium 4 to a Pentium 5000. Like suddenly my capacity to absorb, integrate, understand, process vast amounts of information all at once, that suddenly that vastly expanded capacity. And I suddenly remembered all of my past lives all at once, and it was all integrated and it all made sense. And I compare it to, like, if you're doing a jigsaw puzzle and you have several pieces of the puzzle, because I knew several of my past lives, but there were big gaps, so you didn't see the whole big picture. Now all the pictures were together, the whole that's what that's a picture of, that I knew who I was, and it the absolute experience of the shoe that fits. It's like, this is me. Yeah. This is me. This is the unique mosaic that is me. And I understood.
Yeah.
In that expansive state, it was just incredibly healing and good. I can't even put words to it. And while I was in that expanded state of awareness, I was able to experience that in this expansive state on the other side, my consciousness was able to perceive what we here on earth perceive as the present.
Right.
But if I shifted my consciousness in a different direction, I could perceive or experience what we here on earth perceive as the past.
Right.
And similarly, if I shifted my consciousness slightly different, I could perceive what we here on earth perceive as the future. And I've used the analogy of the multiplex movie theater, where you might be in a movie theater where 15 different movies are playing in one of these big theaters. And what if the same actors in all of these movies, but they're in different times in history, and sometimes he's a man, sometimes he's a woman, sometimes he's an alien, whatever. And from a linear perspective, you think, well, how could all of these be happening at the same time? But during the filming of each movie, that was the only reality.
Right.
So that's the best analogy I would have for what I was experiencing on the other side, like a very deep understanding of how time and space are completely different on the other side.
Yeah.
And not linear.
That's right. No, it's very difficult for our little brains to understand it. It's the same as the vast size of the universe. I mean, we couldn't understand, even if we tried to, how big the universe is. And I love astronomy. I love it. I think it's so interesting, and it has so much to do with spirituality. It all binds in together, because if you think of a solar system and if you think of our cells, they're exactly the same. There's one nucleus and there's one part that goes around it, and it's exactly the same. And that spirituality, what you're talking about there, is about the other side and this side. If you go out of the earth and you look at the earth, there's no time. Mm-hmm. No time. We've invented time ourselves. Although we know we go forward with our age and we get older, and yes, but time is really non-existent. But it's very difficult for the human being to understand it. Very difficult. Very difficult. And so I'm glad you explained that, because that was one thing I wanted to get clear also to the people who are watching us about everything happens at the same time. Every
On the other side, and at the same time, how we experience while we're in the body
yeah,
is that this is our only reality.
that's
But sometimes when we have an awakened consciousness, it's like we can someone drilled a hole between two of those rooms in the multiplex theater, and you can puncture
yeah,
puncture through into another lifetime, and then
yeah.
you go, oh, there are parallels in these two movies,
There are.
right? And to me, it's a good analogy, because when I had my first NDE as a 5-year-old,
Mm.
it literally felt like my life was a movie and
Yeah.
someone had put it on pause, and I was now like in the observation booth going, oh, this movie has me being hit by a train, right?
Will I be hit? Will I not be hit? I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, then they started the movie again, and oh, somebody pulled me out from the train.
Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for that, because you're here now and you're talking to us, and you've done so much in your lifetime to help everyone else, then to guide them and guide so many people who are having these spiritual awakenings is so important.
Thank you. And I want to just tell you, for your listeners too, who are many of them are near-death experiencers, that the topic that I'm actually presenting at the conference, because in addition to hosting the conference, I'm also being one of the presenters at the conference. I'm presenting Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so that'll be 10 p.m. in the UK, 11 p.m. A little late for you guys, but hopefully you can still make it. But I am presenting on newest near-death experience discoveries.
Wow.
And the thing about time and space bending, that's one of the topics I'm going to be talking about in
Fantastic.
newest near-death experience discoveries.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, at least this is Saturday, so
That's right.
that's a good thing. At least it's Saturday. So yeah, that's going to be great. As I said, I'll put the link in the description of the video, and the links to your books, and the link to you also, to your organization and all of that.
Spiritual Awakenings International.
Listening. All of that will be the links. Well, I'll put them all in organized in the
Thank
description
you.
of the video, so that anyone who wants to contact the organization or want to put the name down for this online event, which is going to be absolutely amazing, it's going to be great. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for explaining so many different things that you've explained today. And hopefully, I'll see you again soon.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you for having me.
It's been brilliant. Okay, thank you also to you guys who have been watching us over the last couple of weeks. We'll be here next week with another NDE. And hopefully, we're going to see you at the event too that Dr. Yvonne was talking about. So I'll see you there on the 7th of June. Don't forget, you have the link in the description of the video. Go to it, put your name down, and I'm sure even if you haven't had an NDE, you're going to love it, because it's going to be so many explanations and so many different people there who have had different experiences, not just NDEs, but all different types of experiences. I'll say, okay, see you next week, and sawawana.